A few days ago, Donald Trump called a 30-year-old White House staffer into the Oval Office and offered him a new job as a top lawyer at the agency responsible for managing all the federal government's buildings, purchases, and technology. So who cares, right? Why is this a story? Well, the 30-year-old in question is a former right-wing podcaster named Paul Ingrassia, who admitted to some Republican colleagues last year that he has a, quote, Nazi streak. He also said that every holiday celebrating Black Americans, quote, needs to be eviscerated, that you should, quote, never trust a Chinaman or an Indian, that, quote, we need competent white men in positions of leadership, and that, quote, the founding fathers were wrong that all men are created equal. We need to reject that part of our heritage. Ingrassia made the comments in a group chat that one of the Republican operatives on the chain leaked to Politico. But it's not as if his views were all that secret. In 2023, he tweeted that the purpose of education should be, quote, elevating the high IQ section of your demographics. So, basically young men, straight white men. A few months later, he tweeted that, quote, exceptional white men are not only the builders of Western civilization, but are the ones most capable of appreciating the fruits of our heritage. All of this was ultimately enough to sink Ingrassia's Senate confirmation after several Republicans took the rare step of opposing a Trump nominee. But it wasn't enough for Stephen Miller or J.D. Vance or Trump himself, who granted Ingrassia a personal audience in the Oval to reward him with the new role. It goes without saying that the President of the United States doesn't typically do this kind of thing for most mid-level personnel matters. Ingrassia isn't the only Republican official who's been letting his Reich flag fly in a group chat. You might remember the state party leaders who texted about loving Hitler, lying Jews, and sending their opponents to the gas chamber. Another leaked chat that led to multiple apologies, resignations, and condemnations from other Republicans. Except, of course, for J.D. Vance, who dismissed people's concerns as, quote, pearl clutching, and said that, quote, kids do stupid things. But the kids in question, most of whom are actually professionals in their 30s, don't seem to think what they're saying and doing is all that stupid. And their openly racist, anti-Semitic, anti-democratic, anti-American worldview is a virus that seems to be spreading throughout this generation of Republican staffers and media figures who've come of age in the Trump era. One writer has made news over the last week by saying that he believes 30 to 40% of the Gen Z Republicans who work in Washington are fans of Nick Fuentes, a white nationalist streamer with 500,000 subscribers who said that women, quote, want to be raped, blacks need to be imprisoned, and Jews are warmongers who, quote, must be absolutely annihilated when we take power. The writer who made the claim about 30 to 40% of Gen Z Republicans wasn't some lib or never Trumper, but Rod Dreher, an Orthodox Christian so conservative that he lives in Hungary as a big fan of authoritarian Viktor Orban. Dreher made his observation after a trip to D.C., where he spent the weekend talking to as many Gen Z Republican staffers as he could. A trip where he also stopped by the vice president's home and sat down with Orban and his friend J.D. Vance, who he said he warned about the threat Fuentes and his worldview posed to the country, the Republican Party, and Vance's own political future. Dreher didn't say how Vance responded, but he went on to write about how the young Christians and traditional Catholics in Republican politics are now, quote, neck deep in anti-Semitism. He asked one Gen Z conservative why so many are fans of a white nationalist like Fuentes. And the person told him that even if they don't agree with everything Fuentes says or the way he says it, they like his rage and willingness to violate taboos because, quote, they just want to tear everything down. The reason for this, according to what Dreher heard from a lot of the young Republicans he spoke to, is that this generation of conservatives, especially young men, feel hopeless about their career prospects and their ability to buy a home, get out of debt, get married, and have kids. They blame the elites, the left, and increasingly democracy itself, with one young man asking Dreher a question he took as genuine. So what's wrong with fascism? I'm telling you all this because I don't want us to live in a world where we look back at the Trump era as the good old days. It now seems clear that what's coming after MAGA is much worse. A younger, more extreme, more nihilistic movement that believes itself to be at war with not only the left or the old version of the Republican Party, but the founding ideal of America as a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy dedicated to the proposition that we're all created equal. I think that those of us who still believe in that better version of America aren't really sure how to fight for it right now, but we better figure it out. And I don't think it's just a matter of coming up with the right policies or the right messaging or even the most charismatic candidates. I think it's much deeper than that. The anger and despair and nihilism that Dreher heard in DC isn't limited to the Gen Z right. It may be expressed in different forms and to different degrees, usually without so much outright bigotry, but it exists among many people on the left and many people who've given up on politics altogether, here in America and throughout the world. And it's especially potent among a younger generation who are having trouble seeing a future for themselves, who can't seem to escape the loneliness and emptiness they feel while staring at screens that keep tempting us with the illusion of connection and fulfillment. One answer to this problem, I think, is a political movement that's built on a moral foundation, one that's rooted in the inherent value of every human being, one that calls on its followers to love those who are different and hold different views, not as a way to erase those differences, but to remind us of our common humanity by forging genuine human connection, as messy and difficult and frustrating as that can be. If this kind of politics sounds like it has spiritual and even religious overtones, that was my intention. I'm certainly not saying that the answer to right-wing Christian nationalism is liberal Christianity, or really any kind of organized religion or religious movement. But it's not lost on me that at the core of every major religion, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, is some version of the command that we should love each other like we wish to be loved, treat each other like we wish to be treated, see each other as equals worthy of dignity and respect. And it doesn't seem like a coincidence to me that so many millions of people over thousands of years in far-flung corners of the earth have somehow all found their way to this truth. There's another politically active young Christian, 36 years old, who doesn't work in Washington just yet, but is currently applying for a job there. He's also studying to become a minister. And surprise, surprise, he's a progressive Democrat. James Tallarico is running to be the next U.S. Senator from Texas, but he's already become a national political figure who's inspired Democrats across the country and won praise from the likes of Joe Rogan and Barack Obama. Now, the more cynical view is that it's shrewd for Democrats to run an aspiring pastor who speaks openly about his faith, because that will somehow have crossover appeal to more religiously inclined independents and Republicans. Maybe, maybe not. But I think that view misses something even more important about what James is trying to do. At a time when politics, along with the algorithmically driven platforms through which we process politics, keeps incentivizing more rage and cruelty and despair, maybe the antidote really is fighting back with conviction and empathy and, trite as it may sound to our cynical ears, love. That's certainly what James believes, and it's certainly what I want to believe too.